to the Lords of Cobalt, maybe we'll get some help.
Thank you. This side.
All right, my question's for Mary.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, where are you? You are. Okay.
Was it important for you to have Rosalind's death be on screen, and why?
Ooh, that's a really good question. As I remember, and I don't always remember the process, honestly, so much of it is coming from the self-conscious or the unconscious. But my memory is that the only conversation that I had regarding Rosalind's death was that she died, is that we didn't back off from that. And Ron and I talked about it towards the end, and I said, we're still going there, aren't we? And he goes, are you still there? And I said, absolutely, are you? And he goes, absolutely. Because there was a bit of movement to keep her alive in the air, and I felt that her whole story, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, had to do with a person who was having a final chance to play out some very old karma that meant that their mortality was not the primary issue. And that was really the deepness of that role, is to constantly move the focus to the bigger issues at hand and let the dying be secondary. So what was really important to me was that she died. As it turned out, it was really important to me that she died on screen with Adama. And I think it was a brilliant choice by Ron. It was certainly important to the fans, and it was very important, I think, to the love story. So I was very pleased by the way it ended. Thank you.
My question is, especially for the gentleman on the panel, as a woman who has been sexually abused, I was very moved by Gina's, her whole story arc. Can you tell me, how did you feel about your character's response to what happened to Gina and what almost happens to Athena?
I mean, that stuff was always so hard to deal with, but we didn't shy away from that on the show. And I remember the very graphic scene where Boomer's about to be raped by a group of guys, and Aaron Douglas and I were doing that scene, and Reimer, of course, being the director that he is, and he gets right into it, and we had that relationship, and Grace was very, set on getting right into it, and the reality of it. And Aaron Douglas and I are down the hall, and we're listening to basically it happening, her like pleading for help, and it's starting to happen for a couple minutes before we go in, before he give us our cue to come running in. I was losing it. I was losing it. I couldn't stand it. I hated it. I went in there enraged every time. There's a huge stuntman who works with us, Paul, and I was going in there and giving him a jumping knee, and I was kneeing him. I couldn't help it. Luckily, he was wearing a chest plate and stuff, and he was telling me he's a monster of a man, but it seems like really difficult to shoot. Really ugly and harsh. I'm happy we touched on that in the show, though, I don't know, very difficult to see and watch, but that's one thing about this show. We never shied away from the issues, we examined them and really made you look at them. Yeah. This side? Hello?
A question.
I was wondering if there's anything that the audience never has gotten to see, like maybe something that was deleted or in the script that was never shot, that you wish we could have seen.
There was an incredible love scene between Laura and Donna. It was so incredible. I was just so excited. Tell them.
Well, what I was laughing about is sort of in this, sort of in the same vein, but
At least she didn't say it's no big thing, right?
oh, darling, never. No, I started giggling because well, what else is new? I immediately remembered right before we shot our love scene, the two of us. We came onto the set in our bathrobes, looked at each other and just started laughing. And it was like we were prize fighters. We were just standing there. And he looks at me and goes, "You ready for this?" And I said, "I am so ready." And that's all I'm telling.
You all would have loved it.
This side?
Hi, I'm a new fan of the show. I've just discovered it recently with the BBC airings, and one thing that's just been so impressive to me is so many shows now, a few years later, they just don't really apply anymore. They're not relevant. And this is so relevant, perhaps even more so than it might have been a couple years ago. It just feels so present and so natural, and I just was curious about your thoughts about kind of the long-term legacy of the show and how it's just going to continue to be so important in the culture.
I think the best way to understand what we've done, all of us, because you know you're part in it, and we've talked about it a few times already, and we wrote about it, what the fan base had to do with the construct of the show was as integral as the writers who wrote the show. The communication technology that we have today was monumental in structuring what we did on the show. But what you got to remember is that when we were invited to the UN, and the United Nations asked us, as the only show they've ever asked in the history of the United Nations, to come in and to discuss terrorism, to discuss human rights, to discuss children in war, to discuss reconciliation, and major pieces with the entire planet. Okay, there's the entire UN filled to the brim, and delegates from all over the world, and there we are talking about a television show. And so, like Blade Runner, which is more relevant today than it was in 1980 when we finished it, this show will not be understood for another 25 years or 30 years from today. That's when the true impact of art really makes its totality. Because what happens is, just like a great painting, or a great book, or a great piece of music, when you hear it finally, and there's been many years that have gone through, and you finally hear it, or see it, or experience that art, it devastates you, because you've waited 20 years, 30 years before you got to see it. And people who saw it on the first day are saying, "Oh man, I got it." But people who didn't see it for like 10, 15, 20 years after are sitting up, "Man, I just saw it. Oh my God." That's what happened with Blade Runner. Blade Runner was, I tell you man, it's people who see Blade Runner for the first time today are more blown away than people who saw it the day it was finished. And the same thing's going to happen with this. It's a piece of work that will sustain the test of time and will be stronger on the 50th anniversary than it was on the day that it came out.
I want to add one thing to that. One of the problems, I think, maybe the way it was aired is that sometimes they would break up the season into 10 episodes, and then you'd have to wait, right, for another year to watch the rest of it. And it's so hard because, you have this huge gap. You got 4,000 other shows trying to get your attention. You get into another show, and then you got to come back. So, and then you have,